Aloha greetings from the Maui buffalo. Been on Maui for 30 years, but I came from Kansas where the buffalo roam, back when it was a liberal free state, but that's another story. I'm here today to talk to you about some of the most positive stuff on the planet in a dark time when fear is being promoted and profited from rather than love. The three things I'm going to talk to you about today are Bioneers.org, Bioneers.org, an organization, 30 years, out of Santa Fe, offices in San Francisco. They do an annual conference in October in Marin County Civic Center. And these were the TED Talks before there were TED Talks, 30-minute talks on amazing issues. They do three things. Well, I work with them being part Native American because they honor Native wisdom. And I've been linking the Hawaiian issues with them over the last several years. They also, in fact, do social justice worldwide. And the third thing that they're focused on is scientific solution to human problems. These in the areas of women's and youth leadership, food, health, shelter, energy, education, and entertainment. The human spirit needs entertaining. So Bioneers.org, check them out on those themes. The second thing I'll be speaking to today is biomimicry.net. Biomimicry, B-I-O-M-I-M-C-R-Y. Copying nature instead of harvesting it. In only 15 years, 15% of the global economy has moved to biomimicry because it's not an ism. It's not capitalism or socialism or communism, an ism that is dealing with the banks and the profits and the rest. It is a scientific element that is copying nature rather than harvesting it. And this is because the chemical reactions in nature all happen at ambient temperature and pressure. And what happens with biomimicry is you can get twice the industrial production out of half the energy with none of the pollution. And this is because the chemical pollution comes from high temperature and high pressures in the industrial process. So there are universities in China and Germany teaching this right now. You're not going to hear it on the TV stations, but it is happening, and it is some of the most positive stuff on the planet to affect a way of industrial pollution, getting twice the production with half the energy and none of the pollution. And one of the ways this happens is the third thing I'll talk about. It is green chemistry. Green chemistry, a man named John Warner, and you can go to Bioneers.org and look up any of these names that are on here on these different themes. And the times they've spoken at Bioneers will be on, their websites and things. But John Warner, Warner Babcock Chemical Corporation, is a for-profit thing. His nonprofit educational organization is called Beyond Benign. And this is because as a chemist, he was working around all these chemicals, and he had two sons at home, and he came home with not knowing that the chemicals are all over his aura and his body, his biome as we call it now in these days. And one of the sons that was allergic to this died. And he committed his life to chemistry and green chemistry and finding a new way into this. And here's an example of biomimicry and John Warner's work. The OPE here in Hawaii sticks to a rock. The waves cannot knock it off that rock. The glue is so strong. That chemical reaction in nature happens at ambient temperature and pressure. There is no big, high process that has to happen. If you copy that instead of harvesting the OPE, if you copy that chemical process, you can make glue that has a strong stick that doesn't need all the high temperature, high pressure, and pollution causing elements. Another story. Another product John Warner from his company has created, the asphalt you drive on. Lasts a few years. When they dig it up, they have to spend gas money to drive it to a landfill and do these things. He invents a machine that at lower temperature and lower pressures takes the asphalt through the machine and puts it back on the road right where it was before. So it saves lots of energy, lots of money, and lots of pollution down the line. These are examples of copying nature's processes at lower temperature and pressures in the chemical processes and moving it forward.
Thank you. Well, thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. I can only disappoint you now. Um, I got to start by saying that, I have no gifted insight. I have no presumption that the way I see the world is correct. It just happens to be the way I see the world. And the best that I can do is share that with you. And the background that I've had got me to the point that I am. And we need to share with one another the way that we see it and not have to have this need to compel other people to agree or disagree. It is what it is. Um, Chemicals in the environment are a scary thing. And we lack so much knowledge about the impact of chemicals in the environment. I want to work with you for a second. Let's just go through an imaginary exercise here. Imagine that I have a lemon in my hand. I'm holding a lemon. You can see the yellow lemon. I'm sticking my fingers into that lemon and I'm tearing it apart. Now, the flesh of the lemon is brittle. I get a little piece of pulp here. I can taste the sour, the tartness of that lemon. I can smell that lemon. Right now, you're listening to me talk about this lemon. There are things happening in your brain triggering physiological events. Your heart rate is a little bit different. Things happening in the saliva of your mouth are a little bit different. There are things being emitted into your stomach anticipating that lemon. You are a different person right now, and there is no lemon. If we can change our physiology by thinking about a molecule in a material, can you imagine what a real one does? This is serious stuff. We need to understand what's going on. So the question becomes then, why do we have materials? Why do we invent things that hurt the environment, that aren't helping us but are in fact hurting us? Why do we have prizes then to come up with new ways to repair the damage that we've done? We got to step back. We got to think, why is it that people make technologies that are problematic? And I want to share with you a thought. So I am the luckiest person in the world. If you ever came to the Warner Babcock Institute in Beyond Benign, it is the most coolest place in the world. You walk in and you think you're in an art museum. We feature artists every 3 months working on the intersection of art and science. We have a new artist being featured on Thursday next week. And I just want you to imagine for a minute, if we look at a piece of art, and we're looking at that piece of art on the wall, or we're listening to some music, we can say to ourselves in a very technical way, look at the use of brushstroke, you could look at the use of color, and very technically analyze that piece of art. We can listen to music very technically and say, well, listen to the tempo, listen to the way that those notes have been put together. But then we can stop and we can react emotionally. We can say, I like that. It's beautiful. There's a certain aesthetic to the appreciation of art in which half of ourselves are intellectual and analytical, and half of ourselves are emotional and aesthetic. What have we done in science? But we've robbed the soul of that other half. To be a good science, you must deny the existence of the aesthetic. You do not say to science that I like it. In fact, we are trained as scientists to only speak in the third person. 5 grams of such and such a material is taken with 7 grams of such and such a material, and it's stirred in a pot, and this happens. I didn't take 5 grams. 5 grams happened. Huh. So, if that stuff is a carcinogen, I didn't make the carcinogen. 5 grams of this and 5 grams of that. And so the problem becomes that we have this illusion that you must rob science of bias. Because of course, as a scientist, you must perfectly be, dispassionate, looking at what's going on and check little boxes and remove any bias. But wait a minute, are we removing the bias, or are we creating a construct to pretend the bias isn't there? All right? What would be the worst thing that could happen if I published a scientific paper and I said, fellow reader, I work for a company that will succeed financially if this works. Obviously, I am passionate about this working, but that therefore creates a blind sight in me so that while you read my work, please be aware that this is where I might be not thinking straight because I have a bias. Would the world suffer from that truth in science? Okay, so there's an interesting thing because the other problem is that while there's two types of knowledge. There is the makers of information, and then there's the makers of things. And if you think about that, there's a big difference there. When you make knowledge, you're disseminating information to other people, and you're impacting people, but those people have free will in how they will behave with that knowledge. But when you make a thing, you have the responsibility to know what that thing is going to do. All right? And so if you imagine this, and I spoke here a few years ago, and I think I startled people, and it's worth stating once again, I am a PhD chemist. I make molecules. I have never had a class in toxicology. I have never had a class in environmental mechanisms. If you Google every university in the United States and the world, and you look at the classes that students must take to get a degree in chemistry, you will not find one program requiring a student to take a class in toxicology or environmental mechanisms. Why do we have molecules that hurt us? Well, how could we not? So Beyond Benign, Amy Cannon's organization has this program called the Green Chemistry Commitment. And they're asking chemistry department chairs to sign this commitment saying, well, we realize there's a catch-22 here. If none of our faculty have ever had training, who's going to teach this? And so if they say, well, we're going to take the resources over the next 5 years and try to figure out how to bring this into the curriculum. And if one university had a standalone class and another university integrates in a different way, well, we share that information and people can learn from each other on how to do it. Can you imagine a day in the future where no chemist graduates without that training? Can you imagine making things just go away? People ask, John, what should we be working on? Should we be working on solvents? Should we be working on polymers? Should we be working on plasticizers? Should we be working on dyes? Go, work on the people who make those things, and we take care of them all. It just seems so straightforward. But, oh well. In biology, we have this concept of evolution, and sometimes, and I think in this group, I don't think this is a surprise, this flawed concept of survival of the fittest. If you have this predator that eats all of its prey, it ain't going to survive very long. That Lynn Margulis, had it right in The Symbiotic Planet, that it's not the survival of the fittest, it's the survival of the most compatible that survives. But now, can you imagine that kind of thinking with making chemistry? To have products that don't survive because they're the fittest, but because they're the most compatible. That they have the least impact on anything that is unintended. There are less or no unintended consequences. But the mindset is such that that's a very aesthetic concept, isn't it? And if scientists don't have that aesthetic concept, what do we do? So the logic here is to look at biomimicry from a different perspective and bring that into the beakers and flask people. And I'm going to give a little bit of a chemistry lesson, so you got to brace yourself here, okay? So we hear about how humans, in the way we manufacture things, we heat things to high temperature, we put things under high pressure, we use all these harsh and nasty reagents. And then we look out in nature, and we find that nature completely does so much better than us in diversity and complexity, but also does it at room temperature, at ambient pressure, using water as a solvent. Now, okay, so let's state that and accept it. But why? Here's the big question. Why can that happen in nature? All right, now, again, here comes the chemistry, so brace yourself. In chemistry, what we learn are that molecules have very precise geometries. One molecule looks like this and has these electrons in certain geometries, and another molecule over here has a certain electronic geometry, and when molecules bang into each other, most of the time nothing happens. They just bang into each other. But of the infinite ways that these molecules could bang into each other, very rarely a reaction occurs. And so when we in our factories have these pots and beakers and flasks where these molecules are banging into each other, we as humans, the only way we can make it happen with the word efficiency, whatever that means, is to increase the temperature, increase the pressure so that the velocity of those molecules go faster and faster and faster so that the frequency of those collisions happen faster and faster and faster, and we make more of the stuff that we want to make. And for 180 years of what we call modern chemistry, that is the mantra. Now here is the epiphany. There is never a reactive collision in nature. Nowhere in a cell, nowhere in a living organism do two molecules bang into each other. What happens is they first snuggle up to each other using forces. And they assemble together, they line up, then they react. And that's biomimicry at the molecular level. And if we can understand that approach, and look, and I joke about this, and I call it molecular psychology, and I say, if I make a molecule, if I say, I am so tough, I am so good, I am so smart, I am going to make this be a paint. All right, well, okay, I make a great paint. But you know what? If I put a molecule on a couch and I say to it, what would you like to be? And the molecule looks up at me and says, I'd like to be a paint. That's going to be a heck of a paint, right? And it's that kind of thinking that we need to do to start looking at the world in a very different way. All right, and so for example, let's give a little bit of an example here. One example is, one of the most frightening things is the technology that people use to change their color hair. All right, that's some pretty. I'm not going to get into the philosophy of should we or should we not. People should have the right to do what it is that they want to do, but the chemistry that's involved is kind of scary. All right. Now, one day, I was contemplating the concept of what's called sclerotization. What sclerotization is when an insect gets big, its exoskeleton can't survive that growth, so what it does is it breaks off. So like a beetle will shed its skin, and then it's like all soft and white, and after the course of a couple hours, it turns hard and black again. And I looked at that and I said, something that starts out soft and white turns hard and black in nature. And so what I did was I looked at the process and mimicked that process, and I put it in a beaker, and I took some gray hair. And I put the gray hair in the beaker, and it went dark. And so then I looked at the hair, and one of the strands of hair was dark black, one was light brown, one was dark brown. I go, this is not so good. But then I talked to the person who gave me the hair, and they said, that wasn't one person's hair, that was a bunch. Oh my goodness. So it turns out that this chemistry from the beetle that is edible, that is non-toxic, that is gentle, that is room temperature, restores the human pigment to the hair. It is not artificial. It is exactly that. And so as a submission to this, I am 100% gray hair. Okay, so about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I stuck this in my hair just to show I got a guinea pig if I'm going to do this. All right, so this is, if you could invent a time machine and go back 30 years, you can't tell the difference. This is not an artificial pigment. This is the human pigment that restores the color hair. Okay, so that's an example. Again. And you know what the big breakthrough is that when people color their hair, they beat the heck out of their hair and put this artificial stuff in it. And ironically, the color that your hair is is controlled by the way the proteins in your hair embrace that pigment. And so someone who has black hair, the hair is snuggling onto the pigment to make it look black. If someone has brown hair, it's holding on to that pigment to make it look brown. And when we, in our typical way of blasting the heck out of the hair, we rob it of that intrinsic capacity to tell us what it wants to be, as opposed to what we want it to be. And so the only way that you can do this, therefore, is to approach it from a non-egotistical perspective and say, I'm not going to make my hair do this, I'm going to let my hair do this. And it just seems so straightforward. But how, as a chemist, do we do this when we're trained in a very, very different way? All right, and so how does this, let's talk a little bit about some more examples. All right, so Alzheimer's is a very frightening disease. All right, and so we were thinking about Alzheimer's and looking at mechanisms of Alzheimer's. What's really the issue here is that there are proteins in your brain, and those proteins in your brain with certain metal ions, as we grow older, certain diseases happen to make these small particles make those proteins clump together. And it is that aggregate of proteins that causes Alzheimer's. And so we looked at that mechanism and we said, what if we took this natural material that interfered with that mechanism so that they didn't clump, or better yet, disaggregated? We've got an Alzheimer's drug that's entering clinical trials based on this mechanism. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you can see a protein moving around and another protein moving around and clumping together, ready for this? Brace yourself. That's how we synthesize semiconductors in solar energy devices. We take little tiny particles of semiconductors, we heat them to 500, 600 degrees, maybe 1,000 degrees centigrade, slamming them into each other so that they coalesce and they make the semiconductor. Do you realize your most average of solar panels you have to use for 7 to 10 years before they make as much energy as went into making them? All right? But wait. What if we look at what happens with proteins and we do the same thing and we treat that in the same way? Say, how can we convince these things to coalesce at room temperature? And you know what? We make solar panels at room temperature from water that are non-toxic, that third-year-old children are taking powdered sugar and blackberries in their school, making a coating, shining light, and generating electricity. By stepping back and saying, gee whiz, maybe the molecules already know what they're doing. The third example that I'll talk about is asphalt pavement. It's something we really got to think a lot about. There's a lot of waste in energy and material and toxic materials under our feet, literally, all over. There's a billion miles of road in the United States. 1 billion miles. Now, we can't turn back the clock and make that stuff vanish. We can't, so what do? Do you realize that the sun and the air oxidize the pavement so that when we repave, most of that has to go in a landfill and just sit somewhere? All that waste, we use high temperatures to take out new stuff. So wait a minute, what is asphalt? Asphalt is gravel with some sticky material around it holding it together. Well, so wasn't the semiconductor, so aren't the proteins in the hair. Learning from what's happening in nature with the proteins, seeing what's happening, we've come up with a material that allows us to take all of the old pavement, process it, and put it back on the road at 50 degrees less temperature than it started with no new materials. Again, learning from nature how to do that. And I think that's where we have to stop and think about it. Here goes another chemistry lesson. So here goes. I'll stand on this side now. So in thermodynamics, there are two things. There is entropy and there is enthalpy. Okay? Enthalpy is the strength by which things stick together. It's very ordered. Okay, and so we in science, we take the reductionist approach, and it's very easy to understand enthalpy. Entropy is the randomness of things, and it's messy, and it's dirty, and it's confusing. And so we oftentimes don't focus on that because we can't master that. We can master the order, the reductionist approach to science. But when it comes to the randomness, we're a little bit fuzzy there. But guess what? Nature works with randomness. Nature's design recipes are all on that side of the equation. Something that we don't feel comfortable with, so we don't do it. We focus on delta H, not because it's better, but it's because what we can understand. And you know what? We need that randomness. We need to embrace that we don't know everything and accept that because of that lack of full knowledge, we don't know the downstream impacts of what we're doing, and we should approach it with a bit more humility. But instead of being afraid of that randomness, we've got to look at it, we've got to try to understand it, and we've got to accept that it's beautiful, right? That there's certain beauty in that science in that randomness, there's a certain amount of beauty. Technology in randomness, there's a certain amount of beauty. And if we can put beauty into invention and science, there'd be a day where all we're doing is celebrating and not worrying. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bioneers Associate Producer, J.P. Harpany.
Welcome, fellow creatures. So I have the great privilege of serving on a team that reviews hundreds of projects from around the world, very inspiring projects, in a way very similar to what you've just seen, for the Buckminster Fuller Challenge, which is an annual prize that has been called Socially Responsible Design's highest award. Of course, now with the Biomimicry Institute folks in the game, we'll probably have to share that distinction, but the more the merrier, so that's all good. The challenge looks for, from a wide array of fields, looks for projects that have the potential to radically change for the better, the human condition, and to go towards solving humanity's most pressing needs. And we have a set of very rigorous criteria. We look for projects that are visionary, replicable, anticipatory. I could go through the list, but it's very hard to win the prize, basically. So we're very honored to have the 2015 prize winner here. Now, the Buckminster Fuller Institute, which administers the challenge, has been a long-time ally of Bioneers. We've had several of the finalists here. We've had a few of the winners here to grace the stage. And we've had the board chair of BFI, the brilliant David McConville, up here. I think he's here with us this weekend. Hi, David, if you're around. We really, look for things that are game changers, that really have the potential to radically change a field of endeavor. So Bren Smith, whose a Green Wave project won the 2015 Fuller Challenge, won because it is a absolutely game-changing potential to feed humanity in a way that we've never done in the most benign possible way. Now, Bren Smith has an amazing trajectory as a human being. He was born and raised in Newfoundland, and he was a commercial fisherman since the age of 14. And he plied that trade, that very dangerous trade, from the east coast of the US up into the Bering Sea. And then after a few years, he realized that the way the fishing industry ran was incredibly unsustainable and destructive to the biosphere. So he came up with a mind-bogglingly clever, deceptively simple, but brilliant template for how to change the human relationship to the oceans. And he'll, of course, talk to you much more about that. Now, people who know me know that I can be annoyingly hypercritical and jaded person at times. But I have to admit that Bren Smith's project excites me, and I find it really, really inspiring. So, and I stand here as someone who's rarely inspired. So, So as part of this gig, I have to do a little bit of formal introducing, so let me get that over with. So Bren is the owner of Thimble Island Ocean Farm in coastal Connecticut and executive director of the aforementioned Greenway project you'll be hearing much more about. He's also won a slew of awards besides the Buckminster Fuller Challenge. He's won awards from Oceana and the Future of Fish and the Clinton Global Initiative, Ashoka, Echoing Green. He's been covered in the media in many places, CNN, National Geographic. But the main thing you need to know about Bren Smith, in my opinion, is that in centuries to come, people will look back at a guy who, through brilliant vision, hands-on savvy, and relentless passion and energy, changed the human relationship to the ocean and guided humanity in such a way that we would be able to meet our needs in a benign way, restoring the biosphere and not destroying it. So it's an honor to present you with the first and best underwater gardener in the history of humanity, Bren Smith.
Oh my God, there are a lot of you. This is the most frightening moment of my life. So, my story is a story of ecological redemption. I was born and raised in Newfoundland, Canada, dropped out of high school when I was 14 and headed out to sea. I fished the Grand Banks, the Georges Banks, tuna, lobster, headed to the Bering Sea in the 80s and fished cod and crab. Now, this was the height of industrialized fishing. We were tearing up entire ecosystems with our trawls, chasing fewer and fewer fish further and further out to sea. And most of the fish I was catching was going to McDonald's for their fish sandwich. And I go to McDonald's all the time because it's this romantic moment for me. So I was a kid producing some of the lowest, some of the worst, most destructive food on the planet for some of the lowest quality, unhealthy food on the planet. But God, I love that job. Right? The sense of humility of being in 30-foot seas. Right? The sense of solidarity of being in the belly of a boat with 13 other people, 20-hour shifts. And the sense of meaning of helping feed my country. Those were some of the best days of my life. And I've been on the water for 30 years, and I miss them so much. So then the cod stocks crashed back home in Newfoundland, and this was a real wake-up call. Thousands of fishermen thrown out of work, boats beached, canneries emptied. And it is amazing that a culture and economy built up over 100 years, how it can disappear in a matter of weeks in the face of ecological crisis. And that's when I began to learn that ecological crisis has nothing to do with the environment. It has to do with the economy. Right? There will be no jobs on a dead planet. So I started this search for sustainability, and I ended up in the aquaculture farms in northern Canada, because aquaculture was supposed to be the great answer to overfishing, job creation, and reduction of pressure on fish stocks. Instead, it was more of the same. We were polluting local waters, antibiotics, pesticides. We were growing neither fish nor food. These were Iowa pig farms at sea. So I kept searching, disillusioned, and I ended up in Long Island Sound. I chased a woman down there, and they were opening up shell fishing grounds for the first time in 150 years to attract young fishers back into the industry. And I remade myself as an oysterman. I did that for a couple of years, and then the storms hit. Hurricane Irene, Hurricane Sandy, barreling through, wiping out 90% of my crop. Most of my gear washed out to sea 2 years in a row. Suddenly, I found myself on the front lines of a climate crisis that arrived 100 years earlier than expected. This was supposed to be a slow lobster boil. It's here and now, as everyone in this room knows. So once again, facing ecological collapse, but it means I can't work on the water. The goal in my life, I'm not an environmentalist. I say this a lot. My goal is to work on the sea. My goal is to die on my boat one day. That's going to be a measure of success. But we need to protect and save the oceans for me to die that way. So I picked myself up and started redesigning my farm. I lifted it off bottom so it was resilient to storm surges. began using the entire water column and searching for new species to grow, species that were restorative. So after 15 years of experimentation with sustainability, I ended up as the first 3D ocean farmer growing a mix of seaweeds and shellfish to grow good local food, create jobs, and help fight the climate crisis. So that's how I got here. Now let's look at the farm, because it's hard to kind of picture what I'm doing under the water. There we go. So I had a kid draw this picture, and it's really simple. It's just hurricane-proof anchors on the edges of the farm, and then a rope 8 feet across the surface. From there, we grow our kelp vertically downwards. Next to that, we've got our scallops in lantern nets, mussels in mussel socks. In the bottom, we have oysters in cages, and then clams down in the mud. Here's a picture of our kelp. It's a beautiful plant. I mean, it's kind of embarrassing for me to grow vegetables. I can't go to the same bars anymore. I got to hang out with arugula farmers. Like, what am I going to tell us? But, this is a time of transition. So kelp goes in post-hurricane season, one of the fastest growing plants on Earth. Once we harvest the kelp, the mussels set. Those are our mussel socks there. On the left, we have mini scallops that we do, shucked raw. And then we've got our oysters, which are Thimble Island salts. It's like a splash of ocean when you eat it. Here's the picture of the farm from the surface. I run eco tours, $500 to come out. It's the biggest ripoff in the tourist industry, because there's nothing to see. But that's such a good thing, right? It has a low aesthetic impact. Right? Our oceans are these beautiful, pristine places, and we want to keep them that way. Our farms have small footprints. My farm used to be 100 acres. It's down to 20 acres, and I'm growing way more food than before because we're vertical. And anybody can boat, swim, and fish on our farms. They're community spaces where you can dive through our kelp forest. And we don't own the property. All we own is the right to grow shellfish and seaweeds. We own a process, not a property right. We're going to farm to protect our commons rather than privatize it like aquaculture did. So our goal was to take on 3 major challenges. One was develop a delicious new seafood plate in this era of overfishing and food insecurity. And we reject aquaculture's obsession with monoculture. We grow for polyculture, a sea basket approach, 2 kinds of seaweeds, 4 kinds of shellfish, and we harvest salt as well. But we've barely broken the surface. There are 10,000 edible plants in the ocean, a couple hundred shellfish. I mean, imagine being a chef at this time and finding out there are arugulas, tomatoes, rices that you've never cooked with before, tasted, or seen. I mean, this is an exciting time to develop a culinary cuisine, and what we're going to do is reimagine the seafood plate, move bivalves and sea greens to the center, and wild fish to the edges. So our kelp is really the gateway drug to desushify sea greens. We're making kelp the new kale by doing barbecue kelp noodles with parsnips and breadcrumbs. These are vegetables. This isn't seafood. We're doing sea green butters, umami bomb, bouillon cubes. Our new ocean dinner, it's going to be fun, it's going to be creative, and it's going to be delicious. And it's time to eat like fish, because fish don't make omega-3s and all these things we need. They eat them. So by eating like fish, we get the benefits while reducing pressure on fish stocks. This isn't some little boutique, like bearded Brooklyn bee farm. We can grow huge amounts of crops in small areas, 10 to 30 tons of seaweed, 250,000 shellfish per acre. If you were to take a network of our farms totaling the size of Washington State, you could feed the world. And this is zero input food. It requires no fresh water, no fertilizer, no feed, no land, making it hands down the most sustainable form of food production on the planet. And in the era of climate change, as water prices go up, feed, fertilizer prices go up. Our food is going to be the most affordable food on the planet to grow and the most affordable food on the planet to eat, right? We are going to be eating sea greens. Climate change is going to force us to eat zero-input foods. The question is it going to be delicious, or is it going to be like being force-fed cod liver oil? And that's where the chefs come in. I mean, I grow disgusting stuff. I'd never eat seaweed, right? But if chefs can't make what we can grow delicious, they should quit their jobs. Developing this climate cuisine is what they're here on Earth to do. The second goal of the farm is to transform fishers into restorative ocean farmers. Because Mother Nature created these two technologies millions of years ago designed to mitigate our harm, shellfish and seaweeds. Oysters are these incredible agents of sustainability that filter out 50 gallons of water a day, pulling nitrogen out of our water column, which is the root cause of dead zones spreading through the globe. Our kelp soaks up 5 times more carbon than land-based plants. It's called the sequoia of the sea. We can turn it into zero-input biofuel, 2,000 gallons per acre of ethanol. If you take an area the size of Maine, you could replace all the oil in the United States, according to the Department of Energy. The New Yorker recently called it the culinary equivalent of the electric car. Writers still have their use. So our farms also function as storm surge protectors. Now that our coral reefs, our oyster reefs are gone, our farms replace them. And they're artificial reefs, attracting over 150 species that come hide and thrive. My farm used to be a barren patch of ocean, and now it's a thriving ecosystem. So as fishermen, we're now climate farmers, right? Restoring rather than depleting, and really trying to tackle, in our own small way, the climate crisis we all face. We're also trying to use our zero-input crops to replace land-based inputs. So we've got a program with the Yale Sustainable Food Program to use our kelp as fertilizer in their organic farm. And as the nitrogen leaches off back into the waters, we capture it and close that nitrogen loop. Cattle feed. Cattle have been eating kelp for hundreds of years until industrial feed pushed it off the farm. And if you feed cattle a majority diet of kelp, you get up to a 90% reduction in methane. And you get this beautiful tasting, umami-filled beef, right? It's delicious stuff. When we bring this stuff into New York, I'm going to blow grass-fed beef off the table. And the idea is really to build a bridge between land and sea. Too often our thinking about the food system stops at the water's edge. I go to food conferences, there's like 1,000 people, and there's this little break-off session about the ocean, and 8 people attend. That's why I'm absolutely frightened here. So the last piece is building the foundation of a new economy that puts jobs, justice, and restoration at the center of the plate. Now, I'm not an environmentalist, right? I kill things for a living. You give me a gun, I'll shoot moose out of my kitchen window. I grew up with seal hunts. And I wouldn't be doing this unless it created jobs for the 40% of people that are unemployed in my community, unless it created opportunity for the millions of people that were left behind as we built the polluting industrial economy. That's why I'm here. So we built GreenWave, which is a hybrid a nonprofit for-profit, to begin building this industry from the bottom up. So we work to replicate and scale, we build the infrastructure necessary, and we develop new markets. Now, first thing we did was open source our model. We don't franchise. That's a tool of the old economy. The new economy, we make things accessible to everybody. So anybody with 20 acres and a boat and $30,000 can start their farm and be up and growing the first year. The key to replication is designing around simplicity, not complexity. Our farms require minimal capital costs, minimal skill requirements. Think of it as the nail salon model of the sea. And they're profitable because we don't have to feed and weed these things. We're able to net up to $200,000, $300,000 per farm and employ up to 10 people, and that's just on the farm. That doesn't count the processing centers. So our farmer training program, that's Dave Blaney, 11th generation fisherman. Boats are beached. Now he's growing kelp. He just brought some kelp noodles to the Fishermen's Association, and I hope he didn't get beat up. And what you get as a farmer, you get some startup grants, you get free seed. Now, we give free seed, and we're keeping the hatchery under the nonprofit side because 3 companies own 53% of the land-based seed supply, and seed is the most expensive input for farmers. Right? We're going to look at our system and decide where can profits be extracted and where can't they, where they're not going to come off the backs of the new ocean farmers. We get gear from Patagonia, and we guarantee purchasing, right? It's hard to farm in the era of climate change and globalization. We guarantee to buy up to 80% of our farmers' crops for 3 to 5 years at triple the market rate. We're gonna give people a stable platform so they can learn to grow. And we have requests flooding in. We have requests to start farms in every coastal state in North America and 40 countries around the world. We have land-based farmers, young ones, are just flooding in because they can't afford land. I've got a new guy, Nick, who was farming for 8 years on someone else's property, came to us. It's $25 an acre to lease per year to lease ocean grounds. We also have our first farmer here in California, who's a Mexican-American, second-generation plumber, and I'm really hoping it's going to be the new face on the West Coast here, so I never have to fly here again. So we're also building the land-based infrastructure to scale. Right, we have the largest hatchery network in the U.S., and we're building seafood hubs so farmers can capture more of that value chain. And our land-based infrastructure, it's designed to be an engine of food justice, a place where we embed good jobs, food access into the DNA of the new ocean economy. In practice, this means placing our seafood hubs in communities that need it most. Our first one was one in the poorest neighborhoods on the East Coast. Our starting wages are minimum $15 an hour, and it's open employment. So don't you dare bring your resume. I don't care if you're a former felon or undocumented worker. We're going to figure out a way to work together. But this isn't just about jobs. This isn't about working in our processing factories. This is about agency. One of the major deficits in our society today is the feeling that you can make a difference, that you have to be an Amazon, you have to be a Google in order to tackle the big problems. You don't. So our goal is to make sure the folks left behind from the old economy own their own farms, that they don't have bosses, that they have self-directed lives. Giving people agency over their lives is a core value of this new ocean economy. The last piece of the Green Wave program is innovation and market development. So we're developing new technologies for solar harvesting boats, mobile hatcheries, data sensors, so we can do pollution farming in places like the Bronx and measure our ecosystem services, use it not for the food system, but for the possibly biofuels. Because kelp is the soy of the sea, except for it's not evil. The market power is that it has so many uses in so many sectors. So if you put this together, everybody asks me, what does scale look like? And it's not 1,000-acre banana plantations. It's networks of 25 to 50 farms in a local region, a seafood hub, a hatchery on land, a ring of big institutional buyers, hospitals, colleges, companies like Google, and then a ring of entrepreneurs developing value-added products and doing the innovation. Then we take those Green Wave reefs and we replicate them every 200 miles. You see a Home Depot, we're going to have a Green Wave reef right on top of it. Offshore, we want to embed our farms in wind farms. Why just harvest wind? We have that structure to let's do food, fuel, fertilizer in those same spaces. Our oceans are huge places. There's a lot of room to play as long as we do it the right way. So, just to close, turning Greenwave's vision into reality, I think, is a necessity. The land-based ag system is just entering these cycles of escalating crisis. Climate change is expected to drive up corn prices up to 140% in the next 15 years. It is terrifying, the carbon and methane output from the ag sector. You throw in population rise, growing inequality in the U.S. and around the globe, and food insecurities emerging as the new normal. And if that's not enough, farmers can't even make a living. 91% of farmers in the U.S. lose money year after year. This is just a system that's not working. So climate change is going to force us into the ocean. I think that's one of the real lessons of the droughts out here in California, is that we're going to be forced out to sea. But our wild fisheries can't handle it. 85% of wild fish stocks are over-harvested, and we just can't expect our fish to bear that burden. But this is all what's so exciting, right? Climate change, at least out on the water, is breeding hope for us that are out there on our boats. Because this is our chance to do food right, the first time in generations, to build an agricultural system from the bottom up. Right? Because our oceans are these blank slates. More of the U.S. is underwater than above. So this is our opportunity to protect rather than privatize our oceans, our seeds, ensure beginning and low-income farmers have access to low-cost property, avoid all the mistakes made in industrial land-based ag and industrial aquaculture, and let's just invent whole new occupations to feed the planet and lift communities out of poverty. And this is the new face of environmentalism. It's not just conservation and stopping pipelines. We have to do that. That is great stuff. But it's also about building alternatives, alternative visions. It's about fighting climate change by creating jobs, giving people meaning and agency. Wouldn't that be a beautiful environmental movement if we were pushing for that? Building an economy of food and work where fishermen like me are proud to write songs about it. We can create something so beautiful, so powerful and restorative out at sea, right? And we can eat together, we can work together, and just figure out how to make a living on a living planet. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks. Appreciate it.